I call new. Last week we talked about the error of the apologizer, the person who is forever apologizing for the truth rather than being an apologist for truth. Today, let's talk about the difference between the assimilator and the ambassador. Let me start with the point I tried to make last week about the four roles we're all assigned as believers to one extent or another: the role of the preacher, the pastor, the prophet, and the person. All four. I mean, we've got the role of the preacher in that we're called to preach the gospel. It's the Great Commission. We're called to be pastoral. Jesus said to Peter, "If you love me, feed my sheep." We ought to be about sheep feeding to whatever extent we're able to share the word with people and build them up both within the church and within the culture. And then certainly the role of the prophet. We speak prophetically to the culture. That is, we are ones who speak what is true, sort of like in Proverbs, that description of wisdom, crying in the street saying, "Hey, there is a wrong way and there is a right way. This is the right way." And then as a person, a good neighbor, like the Good Samaritan who was a good neighbor to the person in need. We've got the mandate to fulfill all four. And as I was saying last week, sometimes that mandate and our willingness to fulfill it gets blocked. Last week, we talked about how it was blocked by the perpetual apologizing for truth rather than being about the business of speaking it. Let's talk today about assimilation. Ooh, that's a biggie. Really, assimilation. The ambassador represents the interest of the sender. That's what the ambassador is about. I am here to represent the interest of the one who has sent me. The assimilator says, "No, I'd rather get along. That's my high priority." Now, assimilate isn't a dirty word, right? When you assimilate knowledge, good for you. You've been learning. When you assimilate experience, well, good for you. Probably, hopefully, the experience is good. But yeah, you assimilate. But when you culturally assimilate, that's a little different. When you assimilate individually, you take in. When you culturally assimilate, you are being taken in. When you culturally assimilate, you look at your surroundings and you say, "I want to be like the people around me." And that's when cultural assimilation happens. And basically, according to the standard definition of cultural assimilation, it is, quote, "to bring into conformity with the customs, attitudes, and so forth of a dominant social group, nation, or the like, to adapt or adjust." Now, that means you become one who is not only in the world, but also assimilated to the world and thereby of the world. Now, how does that happen? Well, I guess there are a lot of ways it does, but a very common reason it happens, I believe, is love grows cold. Now, when love grows cold, it doesn't turn into hate. It usually turns into either indifference or affection. Indifference is easier to spot. I used to love, now I don't care. Well, at least it's clear that I don't love any longer. But when love sort of reduces into affection only, it's a little easier to still call it love. Well, I'm still nice. Well, I'm affectionate. And in that sense, I really believe a general problem we've got within the body of Christ is the replacement of affection for love. We are commanded to love God, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength. And I think for a lot of us, what we're basically experiencing is an affection for God. I like God. This is big of you. I like God. He's nice. I go to church. I sing the songs. I have an affectionate, quote unquote, relationship with God. I think highly of God. Sounds pretty weird, doesn't it? But there you go. But what is love for God defined as? Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Where there's not obedience, there ain't love. And the same is true of loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor, well, that sort of seems like affection. Am I nice to people? Are they nice to me? Are we getting along? And so forth. But biblically, the role of the ambassador is higher than that. The love for neighbor requires the ambassador to say, "Please be reconciled to God. I hope we get along. I want us to like each other. Of course, I want a relationship with you. Let's be friends. But yeah, my passion is for you to be reconciled to God above my desire for you and I to like each other." And I think that's led to a great error in a lot of our modern thinking, that we're basically here to be affectionate to people. Now, if we love people, there will be an element of affection to it, but this is an important point. Love contains affection and love transcends affection, both. Love contains affection according to the biblical definition of love. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4, love is kind. That's affection. Okay, good. Love contains affection, but love transcends affection. Read that whole chapter, especially 1 Corinthians 13, 4 to 6. Love is not only kind, it rejoices in truth. It does not seek its own way. It is patient. It never fails. There are characteristics of love that transcend just being nice. Love is largely about service. It's largely about the proper messaging. It's about truth. It's about caring enough about a person to see them reconciled to God above all else. Now, if I love my neighbor, I recognize the truth. In the book of Acts, you see the early believers loving their neighbors by recognizing the truth, the basic truth. People are either saved or they're unsaved. If you love your neighbor and your neighbor is in danger, you want to do what you can to see that your neighbor is brought to safety. If you love your neighbor and you see your neighbor is in error, as in a believer who is in serious error, you will want to love your neighbor enough to point out, hey, that is the wrong way you're going. That's the wrong way you're going. And that's the difference between an assimilator and an ambassador. An ambassador will basically say, hey, 2 Corinthians 5:20, just as Paul said, we are ambassadors for Christ, therefore be reconciled to God. What is that? What is what we want more than anything for our neighbor if we love our neighbor? I want my neighbor, my family member, a person I love, I want more than anything else for them to be right with God. I also, without apology, hope that we get along. I want us to have a good relationship. I want to be respectful. I want to be good friends. I want all of that. But my highest goal, I want that person, if I love that person, I want that person to be walking in truth and right with God. Now, there's the rub, right? Because I think we are all by nature assimilators, really, more than we are ambassadors. Because there's a natural default to getting along, a very natural default to it. I think God had that in mind when he said to Israel, I brought you out of Egypt. I'm bringing you into a new nation. You'll be surrounded by other nations. New land, I should say. You'll be surrounded by other nations. You are not to be like them. You are a separated people unto me. And he kept harping on that in the Old Testament in particular, because God knows us pretty well. He knows we are social creatures and we are created with social needs. Anything wrong with that? Nope, not at all. I have a social need. I need friendships. I need relationships. And yeah, I need to be liked. I mean, and I want to be liked and I want to get along. And that's all very basic. Problem with legitimate needs is so often we seek to meet them in illegitimate ways, kind of like our sexual needs. We are created with sexual need. There is nothing wrong with being sexual. There is nothing wrong with having sexual needs. There is everything wrong with seeking to fulfill those sexual needs in illegitimate ways. Much of the history of the world has been tainted with people who tried to meet legitimate sexual needs in the wrong ways. But a lot of the history of the church has been tainted with believers who also tried to meet their legitimate social needs in all of the wrong ways. Now, why is this relevant to us as we're talking about New Year's errors versus New Year's resolutions that are proper and relevant to our discussion about defaulting to old behaviors rather than adopting and sticking with new ones? Real simple. Affection can override commission. That's why this is relevant. We have a need for affection. We have a need to give it. We have a need to receive it. No problem. But when that need overrides our commitment to our commission, big problem. When affection overrides commission, something terrible happens. The ambassador becomes the enemy. When affection overrides commission, the ambassador becomes the enemy. We're called to be ambassadors for Christ. We can actually be at enmity with God, though, if we allow our affection to override our commission. Harsh, I guess, but pretty clear. James spelled it out, James 4:4. Not a very polite man, James. He said, you adulterers and adulteresses, know you not that friendship with the world is enmity against God? Whoa! Now, what's he saying? Be jerks and don't be friends with people in the world? Of course not. We should be the most respectful, the most gentle, the most approachable, the most social, the most conversational, the most engaged people. We should be that. However, when our desire to be on good terms with the world overrides our fidelity to the truth, now something terrible is happening. We're getting in the way of the truth. And that's why friendship with the world, That is to say, if we are making our desire to be friends with people of the world greater or more of a priority than our desire to see them won to truth or to see even fellow believers walking in truth, when that happens, we are working against God. Because what is God about? Truth. He's about people being reconciled to him. We just celebrated that, right? Christmas, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, peace on earth, goodwill to men. Oh, holy night. That's what it was all about. God seeking to reconcile the world to himself. Very good. Now, look, if I am messaging or living in such a way that contradicts the truth that God is trying to bring the world to, I'm working against God. That means I'm at enmity with God. Now, Jesus said some pretty terrible things to especially the scribes and the Pharisees. I mean, yeah, serpents, vipers, a generation of, bound for hell. I mean, not nice stuff. I think the worst thing he ever said to one of his own followers, though, is something he said to Peter. When Peter was speaking, I believe, out of human affection, when Jesus is saying the Son of Man is going to be crucified, and Peter says, God forbid such a thing should happen. And Jesus said, get thee behind me, Satan, because you do not savor the things that are of God, but rather the things that are of man. What was he saying there? Hey, Peter, you're speaking out of your own human affection, and you're trying to appeal to my human desires. And in doing so, you are in league with the devil himself, who tempted me at an earlier time in my earthly ministry when I was very hungry and I had a legitimate need for food, and he tempted me to compromise in the interest of fulfilling my temporal need. Now you are trying to tempt me to compromise to fulfill a very basic human need for life and for safety. And in that sense, you're in league with the devil, thereby get behind me, Satan. It's a terrible thing to say, but there it is. It's somewhat like what Jesus said when he said, look, you want to follow me? Fine. But in contrast to your love for me, you better have hatred for your own mother and father and sister and brother. Was he saying hate your family? Of course, he was not saying that. What he was saying was never allow your human affection for anyone, even family members, to override your commitment to my will in your life. Because when the two collide, you better be going with my will in your life. Otherwise, you are in league with Satan himself. Terrible thought. But think about this, okay? According to Paul, when he wrote to the Ephesians, he said the non-believers go according to a certain course. He said, even you at one time walked according to the course of this world, which is largely influenced under the authority of the prince of the power of the air, okay? And that's the same spirit, he said, who now works in the children of disobedience. The world is going in this direction. I, God, am trying to bring them in this direction. If you confirm them in the wrong direction, you are working against me. Now, how can I confirm the world in the wrong direction? Well, I can say, as someone who they know as a Christian, oh, there's nothing wrong with the behavior in your life. You don't have any sin. Everything is great. There's a difference between telling someone you're valuable, you are so desired by God, and I think you're such a terrific person, versus telling them, oh, you got no sin in your life. You're fine just as you are. Discover yourself, celebrate yourself. Yeah, that's the message. Feel good about yourself and so forth. Well, if you're confirming them in a false belief in their own righteousness, you are working against the Spirit of God, who is trying to woo them with a sense of understanding their own unrighteousness, so they will turn to the real remedy for unrighteousness, which is the cross. Hey, if people don't see their own unrighteousness, they're not going to embrace the cross. Why on earth should they? And I think that's the problem. If you are confirming them in the wrong direction, you are working against God's purposes, and that makes you, as James said, at enmity with God. When you are an assimilator, you are basically saying, my desire in life to assimilate and to get along and to not offend and to speak what people want to hear is greater than my desire to be an ambassador. Therefore, I will be working more on getting along than I will be working on the proper messaging. And in doing that, you're working against the purposes of God. I remember when I was, I think I was about 18, maybe. I was witnessing to a friend, and we were having some great conversations, and I really felt like he was okay. The fruit's getting ready to pick. I mean, this guy is under conviction. He's hearing the truth. He's considering it. We're having great conversations. I was at his house one night having that conversation with him about the gospel and what it means to repent and how you're born again and why that is so critical and so forth. And somebody comes knocking on the door. It's a Hare Krishna guy, nice man. But he comes saying, "Hi, I'm here to talk to you about Hare Krishna, what we believe and why you should believe it and so forth." And he's talking to my friend about all of this. And I was surprised at my own. I mean, I came to the door like a very angry pit bull. You know, why? He was at odds with what I knew God was trying to do in my friend's life. And that made him my enemy. Now, that I was probably overzealous too, and I probably didn't handle it well, but I was just like, he's not interested. That wasn't the right way to say it. But I did need to be standing there speaking the truth, saying, you know what you are promoting is false. This is not the truth, and we don't want to hear it. I think that would be fair to say, because basically what was happening was this man was coming in violating the purposes of God that were being fulfilled in my conversations with my friends, and that made him an enemy of truth. I don't ever want God to say I'm at enmity with him, you know. Now, I know sometimes we've got a fear of losing influence. I know, because sometimes people say, well, if I say the truth about the fact that no one is saved apart from Jesus Christ, or that humanity is inherently sinful, or that God has a specific plan for sexuality and marriage, or that life within the womb is life within the womb, oh man, I'm going to lose my influence. People are going to be really turned off because they don't like those doctrines. And they don't. I get that. I know. But there's a difference between influence and popularity, you know? Think about junior high. That wasn't it awful? It was for me anyway. But junior high was when everybody seemed to be scrambling to find their place. And you notice the kids who tried too hard to be popular in junior high, they seemed kind of pathetic. I mean, they were kissing up to the cool people and trying to act right. And, they weren't really being themselves. They were trying to assimilate, like, how can I be popular? How can I be liked? And as a result, people didn't take them seriously, very understandably. Just like there were people who also were using their influence in all the wrong ways and bullying other people. I know that. And in both cases, people were trying too hard just to have power with people. But the people who tended to be respected in that environment were people who knew where they were and where they were going. They were secure. They knew who they were. They knew that they had value. They knew they wanted to work on something, on their academics, on their intramural activities. They had a purpose. They had a direction. They weren't trying too hard to be liked, and they weren't trying too hard to be disliked either, but they had purpose, vision, and direction, and thereby they were respected. And because they were respected, they had influence. Interesting description of the early believers, Acts 2:47. After describing Pentecost and that first great sermon by Peter and then the formation of the early church, Luke noted that because the believers were very locked into their purpose and vision, they knew what they were about, they knew who they were, they knew why they were there, they gathered regularly, they prayed, they studied doctrine, they preached the word, they adhered to the basics, they had direction, and as a result, they had, according to Luke, and I quote, favor with all men. Favor with all men. Why? They had influence because they had direction and they were sticking to their direction. So, where does that leave us? Love the people of the world? Absolutely. Absolutely. Our desire is to be on good terms with them, whether they receive Christ or not, whether they hear the truth or not. I still want to be on good terms with people of the world, of course. So, our desire is to be on good terms with them, but our passion must be to see them reconciled to God. That's what an ambassador is about, as opposed to an assimilator. So, Paul said, my heart's desire for Jewish people is to see them saved, to see them come to the truth. In fact, he was so passionate about going to Rome. He said, as people, said to him, you're going to die if you go there. Please don't go there. Please don't let that happen. He didn't quite say, get behind me, Satan, but he did basically say, you can cry me a river. I'm not going to be dissuaded because I know this is where I must go. I want these people to hear the truth. And that, again, that's the difference between the assimilator and the ambassador. The assimilator wants to be liked. The ambassador wants to be heard. And if we want to be heard, that means we speak truth plainly. I'm not personally a fan of that saying, preach the gospel, use words if necessary. You can't preach if you don't use words. I understand the basic meaning that, hey, you need to be a person of service. You need to have good works backing up your message. You need to be someone who cares about people. That is all very, very true. And we lose credibility when we neglect that. However, people don't get saved just by you being nice to them, they get saved by hearing the truth. So rather than say, preach the gospel, use words if necessary, I like to replace it with just one word: preach the gospel, use words there necessary, because they are. Let's not fall into the New Year's error, if you will, of being assimilators more than ambassadors. Our passion, let's see people reconciled to God. Well, that's our passion here on Sound Doctrine Bites. If you haven't yet liked our Facebook page, I wish you would. You got any comments or suggestions, ideas, criticisms, whatever? Shoot me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you haven't yet checked out our weekly podcast, Christians in a Cancel Culture on YouTube, that's developed to basically equip believers to talk about some of the tough, hot button issues of the day. Go ahead and subscribe to that, and we'll keep you posted not only on that, but on events that will be coming up with Cloudfire Ministries. And if you want to support our work here so we can go on providing free content, just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving. That'll show you how you can partner with us. Well, we're here every Wednesday, 12 noon Pacific Standard Time on Facebook Live. I'll see you next week. Meanwhile, let's keep in mind two of the most critical questions the Bible poses. One, Lord, what would you have me to do? Well, the response, what saith the Scripture? Let's keep those questions in front of us this week, okay? Hey, good seeing you. God bless.